over 50 years now, boys and girls and mums and dads have read and reread Kenneth Grahame's magical story of Mr. Toad and his friends Ratty, Mole and Badger. 4 animals who were sometimes so stupid and sometimes so wise that they were just like human beings. For those who've not yet had the pleasure of their company, and for the thousands who'd like to meet them again, this is the story of The Wind in the Willows. How sad the mole had been that night when, passing near his old home, he'd sensed it calling and had passed it by. But how happy he now was that they'd come back and found this long-forgotten dwelling. So, with the match burning low, he reached down a lantern from a nail on the wall and lit it. They were standing in a sort of forecourt. A garden seat stood at one side of the door, and on the other a roller. For the mole was a tidy animal and couldn't stand having his ground kicked up by other animals into little runs that ended in earth heaps. On the walls hung wire baskets with ferns in them, alternating with brackets carrying plaster statues. Down one side of the forecourt ran a skittle alley with benches along it and little wooden tables marked with rings that hinted at beer mugs. In the middle was a small round pond containing goldfish and surrounded by a cockleshell border. Out of the center of the pond rose a fanciful stand clothed in more cockleshells and topped by a large silvered glass ball that reflected everything all wrong and had a very pleasing effect. The mole's face beamed at the sight of all these objects so dear to him, and he hurried right through the door and into his old home. But here he saw the dust lying thick on everything, and there were the brushes and dusters he'd left lying around from his spring cleaning. It all had the cheerless, deserted look of a long-neglected house, with its narrow, meagre dimensions, its worn and shabby contents. "Oh, Ratty!" cried the mole dismally. "Why did I do it? Why did I bring you to this poor, cold little place, and on a night like this, when you might have been at River Bank by this time, toasting your toes before a blazing fire?" The rat paid no attention whatsoever to the mole. He was running here and there, opening doors, inspecting rooms and cupboards, lighting lamps and candles and sticking them up everywhere. "What a capital little house this is," he called out cheerily. "So compact, so well planned, everything here and in its place. We'll make a jolly night of it. The first thing we want's a good fire. I'll see to that. So this is the parlour. Splendid, and those little sleeping bunks in the wall. Your idea, eh? How first-rate. Now, I'll fetch the wood and the coals, and you get a duster, Mole. You'll find one in the drawer on the kitchen table. And try and smarten things up a bit. Bustle about, old chap." And so encouraged was he by the rat's enthusiasm that the mole roused himself and dusted and polished with energy and heartiness, while the rat, running to and fro with armfuls of fuel, soon had a cheerful blaze roaring up the chimney. He hailed the mole to come and warm himself, but Mole had another fit of the blues, dropping down on a couch in dark despair and burying his face in his duster. "Oh, Rat," he moaned, "how about your supper, you poor, cold, hungry animal? I've nothing to give you, nothing, not a crumb." "What a fellow you are for giving in," said the rat. "Why, only just now I saw a sardine opener on the kitchen dresser quite distinctly, and everybody knows that means that a sardine's about somewhere in the neighborhood. Rouse yourself, Mole, pull yourself together and come with me and forage." They went and foraged accordingly, hunting through every cupboard and turning out every drawer. The result was not so depressing after all, though of course it might have been better. A tin of sardines, a box of biscuits, nearly full, and a German sausage encased in silver paper. "Now there's a banquet for you," observed the rat as he arranged the table. "I know some animals who'd give their ears to be sitting down to supper with us tonight." "Well, perhaps you're right," said the mole. "But, oh dear, we've no bread, no butter, no pâté, no champagne," continued the rat, grinning. "And that reminds me, what's that little door at the end of the passage?" Your cellar, of course. Just you wait a minute. And in a flash, the rat had disappeared, through the door and down the dark steps. And from within the cellar came a confusion of noises, of cupboards being opened and slammed shut, of boxes being moved, the noise of somebody hunting in earnest for something. And then the rat reappeared, with dust on his clothes and cobwebs over his face, and tucked under each arm a bottle of beer. "Self-indulgent beggar you seem to be, Mole," he observed. "Deny yourself nothing. This is really the jolliest little place I was ever in." Then, while the rat busied himself fetching plates and knives and forks, the Mole, somewhat shyly at first, but with more freedom as he warmed to his subject, told how it all came about. How this was planned and that was thought out, and how a windfall from an aunt had come just at the right time, and with that he'd been able to buy, carefully of course and over a period of time, the various treasured items that turned his house into a home. The rat was desperately hungry, but strove to conceal it, nodding seriously and saying, "Wonderful and most remarkable," at intervals when the chance for an observation was given him. At last they did sit down at the table, and the rat, with a flourish, went to work on the sardine tin. And then he stopped and listened. "'Pon my soul," he said, "I could have sworn I heard singing. I do hear singing. Now, who in heaven's name can that be at this hour?" And for a moment, the two animals sat and listened. "I think that must be the field mice," said the Mole after a while. And he felt rather proud as he explained how every year at that time they'd come a-carolling, and they never missed Mole End. "It's really quite like old times to hear them again," he said. "Quite like old times. Let's go and say hello to them." It was a pretty sight and a seasonable one that met their eyes when they flung the door open. In the forecourt, lit by the dim rays of a lantern, 8 little field mice stood in a semicircle, their shrill voices rising in the night air.
In the stable where they did well, joy shall be theirs in the morning. Joy shall be theirs in the morning. Joy shall be theirs in the morning.
And as the voices ceased, and the Mole and Rat looked on, from up above and far away, down through the tunnel to Mole End, came the sound of distant bells, the joyful peals of Christmas time. Well sung indeed," said the Rat. "And now come along in, all of you, and warm yourselves by the fire and have something hot." "It really is like old times," said the Mole as he shepherded the field mice in before the fire. "Now pull up that settee and just wait a minute and—" "Oh, Ratty!" he cried. "Whatever are we doing? We've nothing to give them." "Well, just you leave that to me," said the masterful Rat. "Now, you with the lantern, come over here a minute." And the Rat found out from the Mouse that even at that late hour, there were a number of shops still open, where they might buy food and drink. So he gave instructions saying exactly what he wanted, and eventually sent the Mouse off, armed with money and basket and lantern. The rest of the field mice perched in a row in front of the fire, swinging their legs from the settee and toasting their chilblains till they tingled. The Rat, meanwhile, was busy examining the label on one of the beer bottles. "I perceive this to be old Burton," he remarked approvingly. "Sensible, Mole, the very thing. Now we shall be able to mull some ale. Get the things ready, Mole, while I draw the corks." And very soon every field mouse was sipping and coughing and choking, for a little mulled ale goes a long way, and they wiped their eyes and laughed and forgot that they'd ever been cold in their lives. And there they sat for nearly an hour by the fire, and Rat told them stories about the river, and eyes agog the mice looked on at this tough character, and were glad indeed that he was a friend. And then Mole explained how he had learnt the ways of the river, and how different it was for such a quiet living fellow like himself. He told them of floods and droughts, of picnics and excursions, and had them in the hollow of his hand when he mentioned his dreadful adventure in the wild wood. And that was how they passed the time, until the latch clicked and the door opened, and the field mouse with the lantern reappeared, staggering under the weight of his basket. It wasn't long before everything was laid out on the table, under the generalship of the rat. The mole took the head of the table, and in a sort of dream he saw what had been a barren board, now set thick with savoury comforts. The faces of his little friends brightened and beamed as they set to without delay. What a happy homecoming it had turned out to be after all. They ate and they talked, and the rat made sure that everyone had just what he wanted and plenty of it. Long after they'd all gone home, grateful and happy, warm without and within, the mole and the rat were sitting by the remnants of the fire, drinking a final nightcap of mulled ale. They'd discussed the events of the long day, and at last the rat, with a tremendous yawn, said, "Mole, old fellow, I'm ready to drop. Sleepy is simply not the word. That's obviously your bunk over there, so I'll take this one. What a ripping little house it is. Everything so handy." And the rat clambered into his bunk and rolled himself well up in his blankets and fell fast asleep. But before the weary mole closed his eyes, he looked round his old room, mellow in the last flickerings of the fire, and his gaze rested on friendly and familiar things which had long been unconsciously a part of him, and were now happy to have him back. He didn't want to turn his back on his new life of sunshine and fresh air in the river bank. The call of that upper world was too strong. But it was good to know that he had this place to come home to, which could always be counted on for the same simple welcome. In episode 9, the summer returns to River Bank, and Mole, Ratty and Badger set out to keep a winter's promise, to take the wayward toad in hand.